One of the consequences of warming temperatures caused by climate change is the erosion and maybe disappearance of North American glaciers. So I'm going to talk to Dr. Brian Menounos of the University of British Columbia, and he is the Canada Research Chair in Glacier Change. And he wrote an article for The Conversation titled, "2021 was a bad year for glaciers in Western North America, and it's about to get much worse." Welcome to the interview, Brian.
Thank you, Markham. And just clarification, I'm at the University of Northern British Columbia.
Of course you are, and it's an unpardonable sin because my wife is from Prince George. I've been there many times over the last 30 years, and bad me. Thank you for clarifying that.
That's okay. That's okay.
Well, look, let's start with maybe an overview of your article, please.
Sure. So I was asked to contribute a piece on how glaciers are doing and specifically what this particular year had in store for glaciers. So it's really just a general overview of some of the science that's been done by others, including some of the research that's been done in my group. And collectively, the article just looks at how glaciers respond to climate and specifically how they've responded in this particular year. And it hasn't been really good this year.
I gather. After the heat dome, I'm not surprised. Now, before we get into a discussion of what's happening and why, maybe we could talk about why that's important. I don't know that maybe a lot of people don't realize that much of the drinking water for Albertans and British Columbians come from glacier-fed springs. Have I got that correct?
Well, actually, most of the water that people rely on in terms of surface water, that comes in large part from seasonal snow. And so those glaciers represent a small component, but it's critical in terms of when that water is provided to the creeks and to the rivers themselves. So if we were to look at a particularly dry year or in late summer when seasonal snow has been depleted, that's when these glaciers really are acting as Mother Nature's natural reservoirs, and they start to come in and start to supplement not just water quantity, but also the cool temperature of that water. And that's really important for a lot of these sensitive aquatic ecosystems.
So why are glaciers shrinking, and how bad is the problem?
Well, I'll give you a very simple analogy here. Take an ice cube out of a drink of your choosing, put it on the counter. If your room temperature is 5 degrees above zero, well, it's going to last a lot longer than if it's 15 degrees above zero. So in large part, these glaciers are continuing to retreat, due in part to surface air temperature. And unfortunately, this temperature imbalance is really caused by humans.
So how much of these glaciers have retreated? Are they 3/4 of their former size, half? Can you give us a sense of that?
It really kind of depends on when we're looking at. So if we were to consider these glaciers in the last 100 years, in some cases, many of those glaciers have lost 50 to 60% of their total volume. Now, there was some retreat in the early part of the last century, and that we believe to be due to natural variability. There's natural fluctuations that happen. But there have been several studies done in the last decade and last several decades that have clearly shown that the magnitude of the retreat that we're seeing now is wholly unnatural, and that's largely caused by enhanced greenhouse gases.
And there's more bad news based on your article. Apparently, even if we kept the temperature stable tomorrow, the glaciers would continue to shrink for maybe a decade or more.
Yeah, that's correct. So back to the analogy about the ice cube on a counter, it's not so simple. That is, these glaciers are vast stores of frozen water. And so what we do to them today, it takes a certain amount of time for that change in nourishment or change in melt to have manifestations down at the toe. So whatever we do to the top of the glacier, it takes a certain amount of time for that to get down to the bottom. And so even if we were to suddenly stop introducing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, or we kept temperature at set degrees, we would find that those glaciers, because they're strongly out of equilibrium with present day climate, they will continue to deplete.
Now, I want to ask you what we can do about that. And of course, the obvious answer is, get off, cut emissions, get to net zero, and stop global warming. That would be the obvious one. But is there anything else that policymakers can do to, help prevent the continuous shrinking of the glaciers?
Well, I think the most important one is rapid decarbonization, and we have to reduce greenhouse gases, those being introduced by humans, namely CO2, methane, and others that are much more powerful but less abundant in the atmosphere. But the reality is, in Western Canada, in many mountainous regions, we have many thousands of glaciers, and we can't simply put down an insulating blanket, if you will. We're really looking at in some cases, the large-scale deglaciation of many of these mountains. That doesn't bode well for many of these aquatic ecosystems. In some cases, we will experience periods of drought in late summer. But it should also give us a pause in that whatever is happening to the cryosphere here, these frozen forms of water, snow and ice, we often refer to it as the cryosphere, we should actually look to the much larger ice bodies, namely the Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets. Those are the ice bodies that are going to have substantial consequences for humanity. As we start to see the Greenland ice sheet accelerate melt, we will start to see sea level come up much faster than what we've seen so far. And so in some ways, I hate to use the analogy canary in the coal mine, simply because we are watching these large bodies of ice in our mountains disappear. We should also understand that these effects are also happening for some of the great ice sheets.
Well, Brian, thank you very much for your insights. This has been a sobering but interesting conversation.
Thank you very much, Markham.